I'd like to welcome you all today to today's conference, The Future of Real Estate in DC, Walkable Urban Places and the Real Estate Market. Thank you for being here. I am Ed Goslin of Intrepid Real Estate and ULI Washington's District Council Advisory Board, and will be your MC today. This program is co-sponsored by GW's Center for Real Estate and Urban Analysis, along with ULI Washington, and in concert with Locus, responsible real estate developers and investors. I want to thank GW for hosting today's event in this wonderful auditorium. It's such a great facility for our setting here today. And a special thanks to Rob Valero, the Executive Director of GW Center for Real Estate and Urban Analysis, along with Lisa Rother, Executive Director of ULI, and Bernadine Dunnigan of ULI Washington. Being September 11th, before we start, we would like to take a moment of silence for the victims of 9/11 and their families. Thank you. On a programming note, GW will also have a moment of silence at 8:46 today in remembrance of 9/11. It'll be a campus-wide remembrance, and they'll be ringing some bells you may hear, but that will not interrupt our program today. So to get the program going, I would first like to bring up Dr. Doug Guthrie, Dean of GW's School of Business. Thank you, Doug.
Welcome. It's so wonderful to look out in an audience like this and see so many people that are committed to the ideas that are going to be discussed here today. It's an interesting thing to think 11 years ago where we all were. That day I actually happened to be at this time, or about a half an hour from now, I was walking down Fifth Avenue, watching the buildings fall in front of me. And it's such an amazing and indelible moment, but it's also amazing to think about what institutional infrastructure and what the community level systems are that give our lives livelihood and give us life. I've thought about that a lot with respect to the work that I do as a business school professor and then ultimately as a business school dean. I've always been interested in the issues of how business contributes to the community level organizational infrastructure that we inhabit. Now that's a big set of issues and a big set of questions, and I always did my own small research on that topic. But when I came to the George Washington School of Business to be dean 2 years ago, I had a dream of being a part of a business school that was really a platform for those kinds of ideas. Now I have to think about many different disciplines and many different areas, but my core idea is how a business school both does research on and teaches on the issues of the role of business in society and how business builds the institutional infrastructure in which we are embedded, but also how we contribute to that ourselves as an institution, how we actually put ideas out in the world and have a conversation in which people really deeply engage with these kinds of questions that are really fundamental to who we are as a society and how we live. Now, I was very fortunate to inherit a school that was already thinking very deeply about the issues of the intersection of business and society, and what better place to be thinking about that than 6 blocks from the White House and across the street from the IMF and the World Bank and the IFC, really in the heart of the nation's capital. And I was very fortunate to inherit a couple of key institutions and centers, some research infrastructure to really help me think this through. The Center for Real Estate and Urban Analysis has been around for several years at the GW School of Business, and they've been thinking about these issues and struggling with them and trying to come upon new ways to really focus on what we do and how business and society really intersect, particularly in this area of real estate. About 6 months ago, or maybe it was even 9 months ago now, I met Chris Lineberger. And it was one of these moments of just the meeting of minds in which, you know, you meet somebody and you think, wow, this is what I'm interested in. And I'm not a real estate person, but from a research or a knowledge perspective, but you listen to the way that Chris frames things and the ways in which he actually is so forward thinking on these ideas, and you can't help but be excited and amazed. And that started us in a conversation in which eventually, over the course of several months, we decided to bring Chris on board at the GW School of Business, and we have never looked back. It has been so exciting to have him join our team. Chris is actually going to be taking over as the director of the Center for Real Estate and Urban Analysis, and he's going to contribute a major pillar to what already exists there. We have a very healthy line of research in housing and mortgage policy with Bob, led by Bob Van Order, who was a very prominent person in that world for many years and now has come to GW and become a researcher and scholar and teacher, and now is the chair of our finance department. And also led the Center for Real Estate and Urban Analysis for several years. We also have a very healthy body of work that's really about urban infrastructure and urban and civic life. Tom Gertz is somebody who does work on this area for us. And we had the very great fortune this year of actually helping the city of Washington, D.C. in its strategic planning process through the Center for Real Estate and Urban Analysis. So there's a lot of exciting things going on, but then we add to it this third leg of cutting-edge research on walkable urban development. And it's just, to me, this is the place where this conversation needs to be happening. So I'm so thrilled and so happy. I should also say, as Ed already mentioned, you can't have these kinds of things happen without the support of the staff and the faculty that really run them. As a dean, it's always a little embarrassing to me because I stand up here and you know, bask in the limelight of what these people are doing, but I'm really just standing on the shoulders of giants. And people like Rob Valero are just immeasurable in their value. I want to mention one more person because at some point Chris is holding back the product until after he goes through the day, but you will see a very beautiful product that comes out of this that also comes from a new person that joined us recently, Christine Patton. So I just want to thank everybody who has contributed to this, and I want to thank everybody for being here because we love this conversation and we love this moment to really be talking about it. And so without further ado, I'll turn it back to the MC. Thank you.
Thank you, Doug, and again for hosting today's event. As the title states, this conference is about walkable urban places. We'll address the economic sustainability of these places using Chris Leinenberger's research, which focuses on the DC metropolitan area. Our speakers and panelists will discuss walkable urban places from the standpoint of the public sector, private sector, and the managers of these places. We'll start at the 35,000-foot view and throughout the day come down to the actual walkable urban places. You'll discover that DC is a model for the country, and the study is solid research which going forward will benefit policy, financing, and management of these places. Our first session is influencing the built environment through public policy. What works? To start our discussion today, we are fortunate to have Governor Paris Glendening of the Leadership Institute at Smart Growth America, who will address the trends influencing the development of walkable urban places and the policies that are working in the built environment. Governor Glendening is a fellow Annapolitan and president of Smart Growth America's Leadership Institute, where he advises both domestically and internationally on smart growth, transit, and sustainability policies and practices. He was governor of the state of Maryland from 1995 to 2003, where he led the Smart Growth Initiative, not only in Maryland, but bringing attention to it throughout the country. Prior to being governor, he was county exec in Prince George's County and a professor at University of Maryland. In addition, in his political life, he batted 1,000, going 19-0 in elections. So I welcome Governor Paris Glendening.
Ed, thank you very much. You know, relative to that last comment about 19-0 in the elections, that includes primaries in general, obviously, but for those involved in political science or politics here, there's a lesson to be learned from that, and that is you have to know when to quit. Because sooner or later, it'll get you. But I am very, very pleased to be here. I want to thank the university for hosting this and for organizing. A special thanks to Chris Leinenberger for his leadership, his work in putting this event together, and particularly for the leadership that he is giving with the business community across the country on this extraordinarily important issue. I feel honored to be here today. In part, it's sort of a return to my academic roots, although I must add that I recall being introduced that way one time where they said I had taught for 27 years at the University of Maryland, and that I had been in elected office for 31 years and 10 years now the president of a nonprofit. And after what I thought was a brilliant speech, questions, a young lady put her hand up in front and she looks at me and she says, "Exactly how old are you?" And so I must emphasize that some of those careers overlapped a bit. But on a serious note, I'm very honored to be here. I'm also pleased that three of my colleagues with whom I've served, and I'm not sure if they're here yet, but they will be joining us during the course of the day, but County Executive Ike Leggett of Montgomery County, County Board Member Chris Zimmerman of Arlington, and County Executive Roshern Baker of Prince George's County. And this is a very tough time for local leadership, especially on fiscal issues, and these are three individuals who are doing extraordinarily well, and also who understand these issues here and deal with them on a day-to-day basis. Lastly, I thank all of you for joining us in this conversation. A conversation is near and dear really to my heart, having served for the 30-something years in elected office in this region. I now travel across the country and indeed around the world speaking about these exact same issues that we're going to be discussing here today. In fact, I was just in Iowa and right before that in Montana speaking about our cities and our communities and how to make them stronger and more economically sound and competitive through the tools of smart growth, and especially by focusing on walkability. I emphasize those two states because they're not the typical venue that you would think of for having serious discussions of how do we have more walkable communities in terms of being more economically competitive and so on. That being said, it's good to be here in my own backyard, where I would note that for once Washington is leading the nation on this, and you will hear exactly why I say that when Chris makes his presentation. Now, you're going to hear a lot of the specifics later in the day, but for the next half hour or so, I'm going to focus on the mega trends that are driving development decisions in this country and discuss how smart growth strategies strengthen local economies. That is, making sure that our people in our communities have choices about where to live and how to get around, and use this as a tool to attract jobs and business investment. Now, as we all know, these are challenging times in the U.S. Families are struggling to hang on to their homes. They worry about retirement and health care. Energy costs literally shred household budgets. There are serious questions about the nation's ability to shift economic gears. And keeping our communities economically strong for the long term is going to require a different approach to growth than we have had the last several decades. In this age of uncertainty and skepticism about the future of our economy, the sooner we recognize the factors that are shaping our communities, the sooner then we can begin the task of working together to adapt our development patterns to meet those mega trends. And we can get about the job of rebuilding and strengthening our local economy. And I emphasize with these trends when I go around the country, and the same trends for the most part are elsewhere in the world, that it doesn't really make a lot of difference whether you subscribe to smart growth or sustainability or walkability per se. Those trends are out there. And you're either going to go with them in the sense that you're able to harness some of that energy, or it will just pass you by. I mean, it becomes a question of reality and how well we understand that reality. The fact is that trends in the demographics, the economy, and what I'll call culture at this moment are changing the way that we think about sustainability, about the built environment, and about economic development. Today I'm going to outline these trends in guiding how America will look, not only in the near future, but probably for future generations. The demographic trends, if we could start there, the demographic makeup of our country is in the midst of a massive shift. If you look at this chart, one of the things you see is that we are moving away from a country of predominantly married households with children, many of which preferred the type of housing that was churned out during the 1950s and onward. If you look at that, you see that in 1960, about half of our country consisted of households, usually married, with children. That number was down to 33% in 2000 and will likely be around 28% by 2025. Or if you look at it from the different perspective, same equation, households without children represented about half of our population in 1960. That number was up to 67% in 2000 and will likely be well over 70% by the year 2025. Now, if you think of that for a second, today, nearly 70% of our households are no longer traditional families upon which the current real estate development patterns were started. In addition to that change, we're also growing increasingly older as a country. Some people have even started to call this trend the coming senior tsunami. We will reach as a nation the 400 million mark in population somewhere between 30 and 40 years from now. Often lost in that discussion is how much older the population will be. Nearly 1 in 5 Americans are expected to be over the age of 65 by the year 2030. In fact, looking just at today's statistics, 600,000 people over the age of 70 stop driving in America every single year. In fact, I think I was behind one of those people driving in from Annapolis this morning. But 50 years ago, that really was not such a big deal because seniors lived in places where life as they knew it did not end the moment they turned in their car keys. But you think what happens now if you're in the suburbs in a somewhat isolated, typical subdivision and you can no longer drive. Today, the largest majority of seniors are not retiring to the beach or moving to nursing home. They choose to remain where they are and to age in place. As illustrated in this slide before you now, that was prepared by the Joint Center for Housing Studies, a large number of households will still be headed by that increasing, rising senior population. The question is, where will those households be? Now, we're also feeling pressure from a much younger cohort, what some people refer to as Generation Y. This group, ranging from 18 to 30 years old, lovingly known in the literature as the millennials, include about 91 million people. That is actually 10 million more than the baby boomers, which we think about that number have so impacted our life and our economy. Many of the millennials are just entering their home buying years. In fact, my son Raymond just purchased a home last month here in the district, and he is 32 years old. This is indeed what is happening across the country. Statistics show that when choosing where to live, millennials prioritize proximity to work, a sense of community, and easy access to restaurants and other commercial use and transit. Now, I say restaurants, but you know also this means the cafe, bars, and all that sort of stuff as well. But that is the type of community that they seek out. I'm going to talk more about this in just a moment, but let me stop briefly to ask the question, what does all this mean in terms of these massive changes in our population? It means that our communities must offer opportunities for our growing senior population to age in place, and they must offer neighborhoods that our young people want to stay in or return to when they start their careers and families. And I can tell you, if you travel across the country, and most of you know this, there's community after community where they bemoan the fact that the young people are leaving and no one comes back. And you can see the population of the community aging, and you can see that the economic viability starts to get sapped. The millennial generation and the aging baby boomer generation are driving the housing and job market today, and they will do even more so in the future. These demographic trends, combined with what we have produced in our built environment, are setting us up for a drastic mismatch between what the people want, what this demographic picture that I outlined want, and what we have built. Now, when you look at this chart, and I hope you can understand without going through a lot of detail, but it suggests that, especially the last cluster of bars there, that we have overbuilt in one type of housing product, and indeed you're going to see surplus and declining prices and a variety of other challenges. Now, it may sound amazing, but the turnover in our built environment is much faster than people think. We have not yet built about half of what will be standing by the year 2030, and about 2/3 of what will be here by 2050. This is according to the research by Arthur Nelson, Chris Nelson, is from the University of Utah and formerly from Virginia Tech, I think. Yeah, Virginia Tech. Now, these are certainly amazing figures, but what they point to is a great opportunity to invest in the form of growth for the next 40 years that can improve our economic outlook while also providing better living options. And the reason I stress that point is in many discussions, people will say, well, yeah, you're probably right, but we're already built, as if there's not much that can be done. But indeed, when you think about the statistics that Chris Nelson is suggesting, there are many, many options for the future. The social makeup of communities will continue to have more and more profound impact on the type of development, the markets, and the opportunities that are most in demand. The next factor that is driving the market towards the smart growth and the walkability is the economy and the need to reduce household cost. This is particularly true when it comes to the price of gasoline or the cost to heat our homes in the winter or cool our homes in the summer. The truth is, and everyone in this room knows this immediately, but fuel prices are rising, and regardless of ups or down because of storms or terrorist activity or whatever, they're going to continue to go up dramatically. A few years ago, the Wall Street Journal predicted $7 a gallon gasoline by the end of this decade. Others have predicted, including the president of Exxon, even higher at $10 a gallon by the end of the decade. If you think about that moment just for a second of what it means, and particularly what it means for decisions by business people and investors in a community. I'll tell you a quick story. I was down about 2 summers ago, in fact, in Houston, asked to speak to the Texas chapter of the American Council of Chamber of Commerce Executives. And at the dinner the night before, one chamber director said to me, so you're the guy that's going to tell us what we can do with our property. And I told her, I said, no, ma'am, I'm not. I'm just going to tell you what's going on, and you're going to make the decisions. And so the next day in the discussion, we were talking about the price of gasoline. And I said, think about it, at $10 a gallon, what really happens to your employees? Number one, many of them will not be able to get to work, and productivity goes down. Or number two, they get to work, but they spend all of their disposable income, and since we're a consumer-based economy, we slip back into a recession or even worse. Or number three, they get to work, but they demand considerably higher wages to offset this cost of transportation. And so I asked the audience, I said, so which do you want? Low productivity, recession, or inflation? Not surprisingly, no one jumped up with great eagerness about those choices. But then we did say, but there's other things, and that is start to change the general outline of what we're talking about by putting a focus on transit, on walkability, on policies that deliberately juxtaposition jobs, housing, retail, and so on. Now, that's a longer-term solution, and the truth is you can't wait until $10 a gallon and say, oh, we ought to change that. And we ought to be working on it now. Interestingly, a couple months later, the head of the National American Council Chamber of Commerce Executives gave me a call and said, well, I speak to the national conference out in Los Angeles. And I said, well, sure. What do you want me to talk about? And the gentleman said, I really don't know, but whatever you told them in Houston, they're still talking about it. Now, the reason I stress that is this is a very important decision about business and investments and job location. Now, if these are the problems that we want to avoid, we need to start working on the solutions right now. And we need to recognize what it's going to do on housing decisions as well. I saw that firsthand. The last time gasoline was up to $4 a gallon, you remember several years ago, I had been invited to speak in Martinsburg, West Virginia. And that is actually now part of the DC metropolitan area, according to the Census Bureau. And at one time, it was the fastest growing county in the DC metropolitan area. And so when I went out there to speak, all these subdivisions popping up and everything else, and what happened is people were reacting to the age-old wisdom of realtors that say, drive till you qualify. If you can't afford a mortgage here or in Montgomery or wherever, just keep driving. And if you can't afford it in Frederick or Washington County, just keep driving. Sooner or later, you come to West Virginia, which is what an awful lot of people did. And according to the banking statistics, 80% of the people buying these homes during this boom that they were having had their employment either in Baltimore or in Washington, D.C. And on the average, we're commuting 140 miles round trip a day. Now, I asked people there, at 140 miles commute a day, how many of you now are starting to pay, because their homes they were buying were like $380,000 and so on, how many of you are paying for gasoline close to or approaching what your mortgage payment is? And about a third of the hands in the room went up. Now, this is not something that's calculated in the purchase at all, which is also why you're having such a challenge in the homes being underwater as you go further out. And again, something I think that Chris will be emphasizing. This all points to the key for communities of all sizes to remain competitive in the global economy by recognizing that place is the greatest asset local leaders have to offer businesses and valuable employees that these businesses desperately want. That means protecting the local character, the historic nature, and the accessibilities of the downtowns and of our neighborhoods, the things that make our towns great places to live. This leads us really to the third point, and that is culture, a term that we use to describe the discussion of place. In today's upcoming generation of workers, place is becoming a more important factor in the decision-making about where to live. Communities with a strong sense of place will be the ones that ultimately succeed in the future. In the knowledge-based economy of today, as we all know from reading Richard Florida's work, The Rise of the Creative Class, having places that feel like real places, that exude a sense of community, that are engaging and physically and visually appealing, and that offer a high quality of life. This means everything in attracting the kinds of residents and businesses and capital that will improve the economy. It's amazing, but even in the midst of the recession, 40% of the college graduates today decide where they want to live and then go look for a job there. Now, when I was graduating, when I got my doctorate, and I went to Florida State University, and then I went to a political science conference in New York, and my only real question is, where are the jobs? And that's how I got the offer to come to the University of Maryland to teach, and I had never been in the state before in my life. Today, most graduates do the exact reverse. Where do I want to live? And that's where they start looking for the jobs. We don't just believe that walkable, livable communities are more favorable and do better economically. There actually are a number of indicators that point to the rising popularity of smart growth as an economic development tool. And when I say smart growth here, we're particularly focusing on the walkability and the transit-oriented aspects of this whole approach. Many of these, of course, will be discussed by Chris Lineberger in just a few moments. But first of all, we know that home prices in downtowns are higher than the suburbs. This is, on one hand, a sign of a soaring market demand for these neighborhoods, but those high prices also mean that many Americans want livable, sustainable communities. And by the way, I won't go into this in detail, but it's something we should clearly keep in the front of our mind. One of the challenges of this is the face of the issue of equity. As you will hear from a couple of the county executives later, one of the things that happen is on the lower income scale, low to even lower middle class, the demand has become so great that people are being forced out of their communities and forced to the next adjacent, where can I find an affordable home? And so when you look at things like the U Street corridor here, or just north of the Capitol area along New York Avenue and all that development going on, well, where are the people that live there now? Many of them have, in fact, as Rushern Baker, the county executive of Prince George's will tell you, sought housing, affordable housing, in places like Prince George's County. And so one of the great challenges in this fact that I just pointed to is that, yes, it means that there's demand there, but yes, also there is a great deal of validity to gentrification, not necessarily based on race and all as it was in earlier days, but based on economics, which often carry racial implications to it. When I talk about the demand, a 2011 poll from the National Association of Realtors found that a majority of Americans favor walkable, mixed-use neighborhoods. And keep in mind, by the way, the realtors are not historically the hotbed of progressive advocacy. And so this is their own poll trying to figure out for their members what's going on. 77% of the respondents said that they would look for neighborhoods with abundant sidewalks and other pedestrian-friendly features when considering buying a home. And 88% valued the quality of the neighborhood over the size of the home. If young, skilled workers can pick up and move to wherever they want, they would not have chosen regions where, why would they not have chosen regions where they can enjoy a high quality of life, where they do not have to wake up and sit in traffic for a couple hours every day, where they don't have to watch their traditional open spaces disappear, and where their hometowns become empty, denuded ghost towns. I can tell you the impact of this. I mentioned my son Raymond earlier. He called me several years ago when he was working on political campaigns around the country, and he said, "Dad, have you ever been in Boise, Idaho?" And I told him, I said, "No, I haven't." And he said, "You know, I really like it here." He said, "I could see myself living here in Boise, Idaho." Now, I want to tell you what I told the folks in Iowa just recently. Boise won half of the battle for the next generation, the shiny brights coming out of college, right then and there. When someone goes there that's young and just starting their career, and they look around and they say, "I could see myself living here," that is half of the success in terms of competitiveness. Interestingly enough, he and a couple others have just started a new high-tech company, and they are located here in the District of Columbia. But at some point, as that company grows, the question will be, where will they be in the future? And one of the things that's clear is that places like Boise, Idaho are indeed on that list. Many places, in turn, are building sort of development that millennials want in order to attract them, and most importantly, for the companies that employ them. Companies make decisions based on where they're going to be able to attract and retain the type of intellectually based labor that they need. If a major firm can locate anywhere at all around the world, why would it not choose to locate in a thoughtfully planned place where employees can be healthy, happy, and productive, and where the young people will say, "That is what I want"? A good story on this comes from my friend Jennifer Granholm, the former governor of Michigan. By the way, I don't know if any of you saw her on television the other day, a little bit enthusiastic at the DNC, but those who were chuckling did see her. But in any case, she was working aggressively at the end of her first term to try to get Google to bring some jobs to Michigan. She was particularly looking for the Detroit and the Flint area. Well, fortunately, 2 weeks before her re-election, which she won, they did pick Michigan for some expansion. However, they chose Ann Arbor. And when questioned about it, because the press knew that what the governor was looking for, they said Ann Arbor was the livable community that would, in fact, serve as a base for their recruitment efforts. Google now employs about 300 people and continues to recruit additional talent to the Ann Arbor location, and they have indicated a major ongoing expansion. Now, this has been increasingly showing up in news all across the country. Just in the last several months, for example, both Google's Motorola Mobility and Sara Lee's Hillshire brands announced that they are moving from the suburbs and relocating to downtown Chicago. In Raleigh, Citrix, a technology company, is in the process of moving their headquarters from the suburbs to downtown. And in Boston recently, PayPal's Boston division announced that it would be opening new offices downtown. The key in the discussion of all of these was that they were going where they had a competitive advantage on recruitment of the workforce of the future. The key is to make towns and neighborhoods with high density, and that becomes part of the trick here, the high density, and it's got to be relative to the current community development, as well as neighborhoods where people actually want to live. Last major theme here that I want to stress is the issue of density. When we talk about this, most people think, oh, I don't want to be another Manhattan. And in fact, you'll even hear in the critics, they'll say he wants to Manhattanize, crude English, I guess, but wants to Manhattanize our neighborhood. But as Chris will demonstrate, most of the really successful areas have higher densities, but in fact keep a scale that is people-oriented. If you look at a few examples here, Detroit, and I don't mean to pick on poor Detroit, they're actually starting to do some very, very good things. But this is a good example of what used to be thought of as density. I actually just call it one of the best illustrations of ugly density. And we have, in fact, done a horrible job with density in American cities. High-rises surrounded by empty open space that feel unsafe and unwelcome. And this is what a lot of people think about when you talk about density. But consider, in fact, attractive, well-designed density that creates the kind of places that welcome you. This is the Back Bay area of Boston, and the next image, in fact, up close in the same area, is Boston's Back Bay, which has become one of the most sought-after neighborhoods in the U.S. Now, the interesting thing is, though, this area right here has a higher density per acre than what I just showed you in Detroit. Now, also, by way, unfortunately, it's become one of the most expensive locations in the country as well because of the demand. If you look around the country at other examples of what I'll call good density, and you'll see a lot of them are medium and small-sized communities as well. This is El Dorado, Arkansas. That's put a real emphasis on the walkability. We also see other examples of things that just don't work at all. This is what I call car-centric density in Huntsville, Alabama. We know that density without better design will lead to more problems than solutions. It's not just that it's ugly, it doesn't work. And when this was built, they pointed with great pride about how the density was able to accommodate so many people. I doubt there are very many people in this room that said, gee, I really wish I could live there. And yet, if we look at the same places, the next ones I'm going to show you, all have greater density than either Huntsville or Detroit. But these slides are contrast, really, what we talk about people-oriented. Across the country and right here in D.C., people are increasingly seeking out places that are designed for them, that is, for people, rather than just cars. Traditional walkable places, and the second one here is Bethesda, and I don't want to go too much on the metropolitan area, but the third one on the Savannah, Capitol Hill, and Bethesda. I brought some of the local ones in just because you will know them as well. But regions all across the country have their own ideas of what sustainable and competitive communities are. They're clamoring to jumpstart their economies by attracting private sector investments through effective land use and transportation planning. We know, though, that these are difficult times, but here in the D.C. metropolitan area, we are uniquely positioned to take advantage of the strengths that this region has to offer, which is part of the reason that the region continues to do so much better than the national economy. The other part, obviously, is the location of the federal government here, a minor addition, but clearly helpful as well. In times of economic uncertainty, it is our job to take up the challenge of understanding new trends, capitalizing on new development opportunities, and thinking about the future in new and strategic ways. We must, in fact, evolve, rethink, and reinvent. This region gets criticized for a lot of things, from traffic congestion to questions of ethics in government to pockets of high crime. But in this case, focusing on transit-oriented development and creating walkable communities in almost all of our major jurisdictions, Washington, D.C., and the surrounding region is well positioned for the future. I will not pretend now that smart growth and walkability and so on will solve all of our problems. But imagine if you could accommodate a changing population while preserving open space, improving mobility, securing our energy future, increasing economic competitiveness, and creating stronger downtown and local communities. That is a vision which we must work to achieve. It is a vision that this area has a head start, and if we continue along that path, I think offers us our best opportunity for continued economic growth in a very much people-oriented way. Thank you very much for the invitation to be here today.
Public policy need to change around the country, and where are we as a nation with the policy issues?
Right. First of all, most of these things that we're talking about that become the traditional communities and all, with the segregated activities, so housing is here, single-family housing is here, wealthier single-family housing is here, and apartments for others are here, like that one sign said, and retail is way over there at a big regional shopping center and all. That doesn't just happen. That is in law for the most part. I mean, we started back in the 20s of segregating all that. Then we do things like the building codes and all that actually, for the most part, prohibit walkability. They deliberately prohibit, for example, residential over retail. They require a setback with parking in front of the retail components and so on. They require certain minimum parking requirements. And when you put all of that together, what you have, in fact, is someone coming into the community for residential or retail or professional development, set by a set of rules that means that the same old communities are about the only thing you can build unless you go for all kinds of changes and exceptions and so on. Now, what is happening across the country, two things. One is a lot of people recognize this, and jurisdiction after jurisdiction is making rather dramatic changes in their building codes, their zoning codes, their building regulations, and so forth. Some of them just eliminated parking requirements altogether. Many of them aggressively pursuing transit-oriented development and things like this. Others are halfway doing it by putting sort of floating zones over certain areas and say, in these areas you can do this or you can do that. But the change is coming. And it's coming, I would like to think, because of our Smart Growth America's great presentations all across the country. But in fact, it's coming because others are looking at these exact same trends and knowing what is going on. Now, the last part of your question was, where are we in terms of what's happening? It's very uneven. Some big cities absolutely get it and are doing really, really well. Chicago would be a good example. Some medium and small and suburban, even rural communities get it and are making dramatic changes. Others do not, and you can see the economic life starting to filter away. The biggest single change is probably the recognition of the importance of transit. And the number of jurisdictions that are adopting transit systems across the country, and the citizens willing to vote for a tax increase to support that. In the last 11 years, there have been a little over 300 referenda submitted to the voters involving a tax increase, normally a sales tax increase, to support the construction or expansion of a metro, of a transit system, generally rail. In over 70% of those referenda, They have been approved by the voters, and the average approval rate has been 60%. Now, I don't want to bore you with statistics, but what does that tell you? Citizens seem to get it, in some cases, even more than elected official decision makers, and certainly more than, let's say, the majority in Congress that has moved very aggressively against funding further transit.
Come across any changes in trends for home ownership among millennials, and what kind of impact do you think that would have on the walkable community? There seems to be, from the housing crash, a change in preference for lessening the demand.
Right. Yes, there are both the trends and then a lot of specific examples, and Chris will be covering a lot of this, but most specifically, several things. One is the demand is much more for smaller housing per square foot. A lot of jurisdictions are changing. In fact, in several cities now, they have approved zones with as small as 800 square feet in a place for beginning millennium type people. The other change that is occurring here fairly dramatically is moving away from the cookie cutter subdivision type approach. You don't need 4 bedrooms if you're only 1 or 2 adults living there. One of the subsets of these trends, which I did not talk about, but in fact the Huffington Post has an article on this just this morning, but the number of young people that are delaying having children, or only having 1 child, or having children much later in life. And so for college graduates, the marriage of first child now is in the early 30s for both the men and women. And so what you have is a major change from a family. When I was born, almost all the families had 5 or 6 children, as I have 5 siblings. It's changing from that to the more recent 2.4 children to today, where the average young family is simply not having children early, and when they do, it's normally 1 or 2. And that's a huge impact in lessening the demand for the traditional subdivisions. Yes?
My question is about, I guess, your opinion on the role or the responsibility of the federal government in this market to foster walkable communities and transit-oriented development. And I think of 2 examples in Maryland, one being the Census Bureau down by the Suitland Metro, where they connected it basically to the metro, and it's done nothing to foster, it's an island unto itself, it does nothing to foster residential or retail. And then there's the plan to potentially bring the FBI up to the Greenbelt Metro, and that would be one of the largest economic development projects in Maryland in decades. And yet at the same time, I worry that it's going to be something like the Census Bureau, connecting it directly to the metro and doing nothing for the county, for the neighborhood.
Right. Your question is a very good one, and right on target here that the federal government does have a major role from so many different perspectives. One of the biggest ones is obviously the location of their major facilities, or to some extent of any facility. The GSA has adopted some guidelines, and for these major installations now require, or give preference, I should say, to sites with access to transit and so on. And that is part of the reason that they are located increasingly around Metro. The challenge, however, is the issue that often comes up about security. And so for the FBI, for Fort Meade in Maryland, for outer space, or whatever you're talking about, they tend increasingly to put such a focus on security that they isolate and do not provide the stimulus for the other type of economic growth in that immediate area. Bob Peck, the former GSA director, or commissioner of buildings, who unfortunately is no longer with them, but he had a wonderful point, I thought, and he said, you know, what's so strange about this is just really a matter of design. And they have that new building right there on Florida Avenue and New York that houses some very sensitive agencies, and they simply made a design so that it can be retail on the ground floor, but there is a very strong bomb blast proof, or at least reducing walls between them and so forth. So part of the question even on location is you can't let the security issues undermine really what's potential economic expansion, which is where a lot of our security really come from. The other part of this, though, is I believe, as does this administration, the national administration, that the federal government has a large role in this in general. And so they have established what is called the Sustainability Partnership with EPA, Housing, and Department of Transportation working together, and they're trying to get communities to think about all of these things together, and in applying for grants and support from any one of those three agencies, you have to address these type of questions. And specifically, they have grants and support for creating more walkable communities, for things of this type. Now, the administration also tried to expand in a dramatic way transit and requirements for much more transit-oriented development. Unfortunately, that got held up in the budget debate and did not expand the way that the administration was looking for. But I think both on individual siting decisions as well as on overall broad policy, there is a significant role for the federal government. Now, I must emphasize lastly that it is not about having the federal government make zoning decisions or planning decisions or anything of this type, but if it's in our economic interest to reduce the consumption of energy, and if it is our economic interest to be competitive and have economically strong local communities, then policies that support those, and we did that in the state of Maryland by saying, basically, if you have these policies in place, you'll be eligible for state grants and state support and state preferences for location of state facilities. If you do not, fine, we're not going to do zoning, but we're also not going to pay for the cost to come out of that. And I think to some extent the national government should be moving very much in that direction as well. Thank you all very much, and now we'll be getting to the specifics of what this really means. Thank you.